the great pleasure to introduce Lucy, who will be telling us all about what we've just been talking about. After that, I'll open it up for a general discussion, and you can address questions to any of the speakers who are still remaining here. Well, until about half.
First of all, thank you to the organizers. It's really a tremendous opportunity to be able to engage with today's discussions. And I should say that the topics that we're discussing, and I hope the comments that I'm going to make are not at all abstract for me, despite the fact that I'm just going to be engaging with the text and I don't have any particular stuff. But they're rather deeply embodied and lived and affectively charged, and I'm going to come back to this question of the abstract and the concrete probably several times in the comments I'm going to make. And then I was thinking about speed, and so it's been quite an interesting experience producing this this kind of just-in-time commentary. But then I was thinking, okay, but have I produced this commentary over the past 6 hours, or have I produced it over the past 30 years? And I do not think I could answer that question any way other than yes. And I think that makes a difference. So I guess to begin, I should say that I think that the particularities of my own long-term engagement with questions about the nexus of social sciences and design leaves me with a less unequivocal and perhaps even conflicted view of design than Harvey's. Though then I thought, well, but perhaps Harvey would say that my experiences of design can't be compared to his because I was in a different, I was at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, but then I also recollected that my time there included engagement with the design of the photocopier, and I thought that would certainly be a competitor for the kind of banality that Harvey was claiming for his objects. But that's in part the point that I want to make. I can no longer think about disciplines categorically. And I can't think about efforts at reconciliation across disciplinary boundaries as something new. I can only think about these things historically, specifically, albeit also conceptually, in terms of identification, commitment, what's at stake, what matters. So it's not at all about us and them, but it's much more about very porous boundaries and the traffic across those boundaries. And also, crucially, I think, differences that matter, the things that we want to defend in terms of making difference, as well as reconciliation. And not so much differences in us as people or even as practitioners, but most importantly, I think, differences in the conditions within which we're able to work. Those are the things that I'm most preoccupied across the social sciences design. I think those are the things that we need to be focusing on and tracing across all of these complex boundaries of sameness and difference. What are the conditions in which we're able to work, and what do those make possible, and what do they foreclose? So just to summarize my 30 years engaging with this subject in 30 seconds, I began as a PhD student at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center in 1979, and my initial relationship to the forms of design research that were going on there were primarily critical engagements with cognitive science, with artificial intelligence, with aspects of the ways in which humans were figured in computer-human interaction. I then, beginning in the late 1980s and inspired by colleagues like Pele, discovered Scandinavian participatory design, felt here's how it could be otherwise. Here was a way of not only being a critic, however constructively I was trying to do that, but also actually being able to offer how it could be otherwise, what would be alternatives to the forms of practice that I was critiquing. And then, and also engaging in a series of programmatic discussions of relations between social science and design, sitting on many panels at conferences, primarily computer science conferences, discussing primarily what social sciences could do for design. And finally coming to realize that the programmatic discussions were hopeless, and that what we needed to do, and what we were beginning to be able to do, that is, I and my colleagues at a small group of colleagues at Xerox PARC, would be actually to try to enact a design practice that embodied the theoretical and the practical and the political commitments that we had. And so the final sort of phase of my time at Xerox PARC was about trying to iteratively enact what we thought of as a practice-based or work-oriented kind of cooperative design practice around document-related information technologies. And a very important part of that was to try to figure out what would constitute a version of cooperative design that would be practicable and sustainable within the conditions that we ourselves were working. Now, with that, I'm gonna start to sort of pull out some things from the day. It's going to be therefore not quite as fluidly connected, but I hope I can trace out some connections. Some of these are just things that I was really struck by, and the first thing that I wanted to mention was Alex's image of the mission statement. It was a little card with a list, and I don't know what the era of that mission statement was, but I know that it wasn't Xerox's mission statement, and I know that we were issued a mission statement that was identical to that one. And I think this is really a fascinating question. How is it that companies enacting, where the purpose is to enact their distinctiveness, to proclaim their distinct commitments, can repeat and copy exactly the same discourse? I think this is a basic question about the performance of sameness and difference that we should be looking at. Now, the little cards that we were issued at Xerox came in response to an employee satisfaction survey where we were, and this I learned a lot about surveys. We were asked, there was a question like, I understand the mission as laid out by Xerox senior management, and you could then, agree, disagree. Now, we were all completely baffled about what in the world was going on, as was senior management. So we answered that statement, disagree. I don't have a lucid sense of what the whole project is. Well, what that brought on us was a barrage of communications of that. Oh, okay, well, here's a little wallet card that you can carry around with the mission statement, so you'll never have that question again. So from that, I learned that in every successive employee satisfaction survey, I said, I understand it. Just, don't do anything. No problem here. And I was really fascinated in that list by the kind of slippages in the we's, because I also want to talk about we's. So the first lines were we want to delight our customers, employees, and shareholders. So obviously we there is senior management, because these are the others for them. But further on, when it went into the other things, and there was something that we were going to do relentlessly, I forget what that was, then suddenly it became this kind of workers' collective. You know, we were all doing this together. And again, I just think this is a very rich vein of critical analysis that has yet to be fully tapped. I wanted to, so I've sort of raised this question of thinking about enactments of sameness and difference, and the connections of that to questions of, well, I think very much to questions of disciplinarity, and also to questions of sameness and difference in terms of the old and the new, reproduction, innovation. And I have to say that innovation is a word to which I've developed an allergy. And when I hear that word, it's like my brain shuts down. You know, it has this kind of completely suffocating effect on any kind of imaginative thinking. Because discourses of innovation are so relentlessly, I'll use that word, so relentlessly repetitive, reiterative. And this, again, I think is a fascinating, how is this possible? I just find that a really interesting and unanswered question. And I have, just coming to the end of a project that's been funded by the League of Human Trust with Andre Dagny, who's a PhD student at Lancaster, and Laurel Lotz, who was a postdoc, called Relocating Innovation, Places and Material Practices of Future Making. And the aim of this project, which was a series of a set of 3 very differently located case studies, and I won't go into that because it would take too much time. But basically, we were trying to recover, re-specify what we might mean by innovation by relocating it, both in the sense of returning innovation to the embodied places and practices of making, and also in the sense of returning innovation to a sense of location in the more political sense, in the sense of location that I think about when I talk about things like located accountability in design. So relocating innovation from a kind of free-floating signifier to something where we're actually examining how place matters and what the politics and material practices involve. And I think that's a project that we need to do a whole lot more of. And I think I felt that Michelle's talk really enacted the relations between theorizing and specific kinds of critical empirical analyses, opening up for us some general problematics to think about, and then looking at those specifically in relation to these campaigns about the figure of girls and women. And I think, you know, that to me that's one example of the kind of engagement with the, I mean, we can see that in part as an engagement with the appropriation, with the ways in which new media are being appropriated to perform certain other kinds of appropriation. So in this case, the idea of we talked about girls and women as the kind of residue. So, you know, we've given the men a chance and they've blown it. So what else? Oh, well, you know, there are girls and women around. And I think there are other things that have served that function. Actually, I think culture was the residue for the both technical practices and also management and organization practices. The kind of discovery of culture. In some ways, I think the home is a residue of the things left out of the workplace that then can be mobilized as as a possible solution to all of the problems that were generated through attempts to introduce new technologies into the workplace. And the important thing, I think, across all of these figures of girl, of culture, girls, home, is how those figurations get constructed. As Michelle was pointing out, what's problematic here is the figuration of the girl and the way in which that figure is being mobilized. I think that design discourses are full of such figures, and that they always need to be, again, relocated. So when we talk about, the home, what's happening when we refer to the home? What's happening when we refer to singular figures that stand for a category, and that simultaneously, of course, make absent all of the differences within that category that are crucial if we really want to attend closely to what's going on. Okay, and it seems to me that the question of culture, of the appropriation of the figure of the girl and the promise of women in development, social science in relation to design, that in all these cases, the thing that we have to really track is the tricky relationship between inspiration and appropriation. How can we encourage the kind of traffic across these porous boundaries between the disciplines that can serve to provide mutual inspiration, and at the same time differentiate those forms of inspiration from forms of appropriation that are problematic, and how can we articulate what's problematic about them? I think that's also a really important project. And how can we have that conversation where it doesn't become a matter of policing the boundaries or restoring some kind of purity, or saying that that Latour belongs to STS and can't be or more pointedly that ethnography belongs to anthropology or the social sciences, and can't be used inspirationally and in other ways in design. At the same time, again, tracking the things that matter, the things that give integrity to whether it's a theoretical argument, it's a construct, it's a practice, things that give a kind of integrity to that concept or that practice that needs to be defended. And I don't think there's any simple answer to that. I think it's very, very difficult. But I think we have to keep both encouraging the traffic and tracking carefully what happens as things travel, and raising concerns about partial migrations, partial appropriations, and reworkings. And I think when I look at the video that Michelle showed us, and the kind of incredible complexity of inspiration and appropriation, and the ways in which I think we should both allow ourselves to be moved by that, and not feel that those affective effects are things that we should suppress, because we know that in some other analysis this thing is corrupt and problematic. But both allow ourselves to be moved and maintain our critical faculties, I think, and then disentangle, do the kind of, and this is where I think that the relationship between taking things apart and making things is, those two things are, intimately and inseparably interrelated. So I think we have to, I think taking things apart is an extremely creative act. Doing critical work, in my view, is extremely generative. Generative critique is, I think, one of the most creative forms of making that we can do. And at the same time, I also think that making things can be done in a very a very revealing and critical way. Okay, so generative critique and critical making. Michelle used this wonderful phrase, hitching things together, and I really like that as, you know, how are things getting hitched together, for better and for worse. I was thinking in terms of the relations between speculative design and the kinds of practices that Michelle was talking about. What are the sort of connections there? I mean, I think this goes back to the question of who are the actors, who are we, and who are we who are who are intervening to try to change the circumstances of them there, and what are the politics of that? And when I think about alternatives, because of course one of the complications of the story that Michelle told us was that it's all, we have things getting hitched in like micro grants. We came back in Pele's story to the idea of trying to help the women's group in Malmo actually create some sustainable businesses around the skills that they could bring. So we don't want to just lump those two things together and say, well, these are entrepreneurial projects, and therefore, you know, they're subject to the same critique. I think they're different entrepreneurial projects in ways that matter. And one of the ways, so one of the ways I would articulate those differences is in the relations between the designers and the subjects of design. In the case of the campaign by Nike, it's an attempt to basically use, I guess, a kind of form of viral marketing, but in a way that constitutes this singular figure and then spreads this message around the world and gets everybody to dial up and make their micro grants contributions. In the case that Pele described, it's this painful, painstaking work of setting up a relationship, of trying to figure out what's actually, trying to create the sorts of connections that need to be created in order for some sort of meaningful collaboration to happen. I think about groups like the Global Fund for Women, which is an organization based in the United States, the purpose of which is to channel resources from the United States to women's organizations in other parts of the world. And they do this by setting up, through micro grants. But there are two really interesting things about what they do. One is that the grants do not specify what should be done with the money. That's a condition of, if you give money to the Global Fund, you don't get to say anything about what should be done with it. And when they identify a grantee, the money comes with no instructions. And they use a developing network of previous grantees to act as the network through which funds get given out subsequently. So they're simultaneously building a very, very distributed network of grant making through their practice. And I think those are the kinds of working with the very, very difficult questions of the relationships among the various actors that I think are very important. Okay. So again, I think that what's really important about the case that Pele told us about is, I was really interested in the different spaces of the stage and the neighborhood and the factory, and wondering about how things travel between them. But the real story, I think, that those projects tell us are about the complexities of identifications, of affiliations, of how actors either lend material resources or cultural legitimacy to each other or don't, and design as the negotiation of those things, including all of the complications of financing and associated accountabilities, what is visible and legible as a deliverable in a situation where the real project is about the ongoing relations rather than some kind of a roadmap or vision of the future. And all of those things are challenges that design needs to face. So one question I have is, what if we defined rigor in relation to design or anything else in terms of long-term commitment and ongoing engagement? So a rigorous practice is one that's made up of long-term commitments and ongoing engagements. And I'm going to then turn to Harvey's provocation, at least for me. The premise that design is more tacit than sociology. I love the phrase conspicuous articulation. I think that's a lovely description of the practices of the social sciences. But I want to speak to this question of, come back to this question of the categories, of the disciplinary categories, and the sort of the framing of designers do this and sociologists do that, and ask which versions of each of those things, because I can't use those categories anymore without qualification. Or without noting the work in any given moment that the absence of qualification is doing, because those categories are about making sameness and difference, and they're always mobilized in particular moments, either to make sameness or difference. This is the old problem of rather than contaminating sociology with design, I would argue that Harvey is reiterating the purification of those, is enacting the purification of those categories in reiterating them, and at the same time erasing the differences within the categories and all the already existing connections across them. So I think I will close with an anecdote about a workshop that I was involved with not too long ago that was staged as an encounter between social scientists and designers. This was at Lancaster. It was part of a program called, somewhat ironically, Design for Safe Living, about mobilizations of design to address questions of insecurity. So we had a series of sessions as part of the workshop, but the basic premise was that social scientists are abstract and designers are concrete. And so I should say social scientists are hopelessly abstract and designers are concrete, and that needs to be remediated through an exercise of designing, of doing something with stuff. And I guess I just want to make a small plea here that we don't now fetishize doing things with stuff. I think, when I'm sitting in my study, I am inhabiting an incredibly rich imaginative space. It's not just me and just my computer and my books. It's, so I think we don't want to fetishize, the object as the only evidence for engagement with imaginative, creative kinds of activities. But so anyway, the idea was that we were going to, stop talking and do some designing, which always makes me go. Then we had big pieces of paper, and we were supposed to be getting concrete and designing. My group was assigned the task of designing a toaster. And I stared at this blank piece of paper, and I said, there is nothing more abstract than a decontextualized toaster. And I will stand by that statement. And because, of course, what I wanted to do was not design the toaster. I wanted to think, okay, what would a research project about toasters look like? Well, we trace all the materials used, we trace where they come from, we look at the the political economies of the toaster. We'd look at, we would explode the toaster as an object into all of its relations and practices. So I really resist the idea that a decontextualized object is concrete, and that rich conceptual theorizing is by definition abstract. Now, both of them can be. They're good and bad versions of everything, but I don't think it cuts along those lines. And then I want to end, I guess, by turning back to this incredibly beautiful piece that Harvey read for us from David Anton, this piece Tuning, which I think, I was really moved by that, and I think everybody was really moved by that. And that was such a wonderful piece, and you used that to illustrate, that piece illustrated the beauty of articulation in all senses. It illustrated the beauty of articulation in the sense of, to me, the power of putting things into words. Because what that piece did was it took a practice, a tacit practice, which we do not articulate, and by putting it into words, it moved us and gave us a new relationship to that practice. And it used that articulation to theorize articulation as a form of human activity, to theorize what it means to go along together in a very, very particular way. And that, I don't think we can take a better analogy for relations between social sciences and design than that story of articulation. That is exactly what we should be doing and how we should be going about it.
Okay. Questions? So anyway.
The business about my reification of all things. But of course you're right, and just as I said that I was responding to a kind of old-fashioned industrial design, that's what colors my brain. I'm also heavily colored by an old-fashioned sociology. And I'm not in a position to say anything about the significance of old-fashioned design in the design world, but I am about old-fashioned sociology. And from where I sit, its continuing domination is very remarkable to me. And I not only know the world that you have lived in, but other related worlds. And they're stronger in Britain as other worlds and on the continent. But in the U.S., I'm afraid that my reification is not artifice.
You wish it were more nuanced. Yeah, no,
Any other questions?
I'm intrigued today about the notion of design and social science being put together, or entanglement, particularly in terms of calling them disciplines, because I'm aware that those social science is very much dominated by the academy, that the public recognition of whether someone is a social scientist is largely due to the academy's validation through graduation or tenure. I would propose a designer's definition is something where you're developing new artifacts that's accepted by a target audience. It's a very practical thing, and you can have designers who don't have anything to do with the academy. And so those two things can be quite different from one another, and neither of them seem to have a justification for motivations about changing the world in a particular direction, which seems to be a lot of people's discussion. I don't mind the fact that people have this motivation, but I'm not sure whether it's inherent in the disciplines that people are talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anything is inherent in the disciplines that we're talking about. I think it all depends, I mean, that's kind of where I started, where it all depends on the conditions that you're working in.
But if you're talking about social scientists, surely believe that the world is worth observing, that that's inherent in the discipline.
Oh, sure. It's not
But
that
that's
they're-
not inherent in design, is it?
Well, design has its own premises, but I think the way that those premises get constituted and enacted and resisted is, we can't really talk about it without being more specific about the circumstances in which, certainly in the case of designers, the circumstances in which designers are working. And also I think there's so much more to be said about the micropolitics of novelty. Designers don't just make something new and then, either people like it or not. The whole question, the enacting the new is a fundamental demand, competency that you have to have, and it is always a highly political. It's done in the moment. I mean, it's not, because nothing is intrinsically new. So things have to be performed as new, and they have to be performed as new by being articulated in ways that call out difference, that make difference. I mean, making newness is about making difference, and it's not given in any way, it's not self-evident. And I think there's, again, so much more to be done in articulating the micropolitics of making difference that gets arguably constituted as new or recognized as novelty. So designers, at least the design practices that I have any understanding of, are just largely composed of that work, of performing difference.
Do you think we could give a lot more effort in our exploration and in our teaching on the process of writing? Now, as a kind of a person who's very new to sociology, but a person who spent time making buildings, for me it's the same. It's not a different process. It's both are about a form of communicating with the broader public. But given how much time we spend sitting down, literally kind of constructing our thinking, it amazes me in my education at a place like the LSE that very few people actually talk about writing as an essential process of design, of making what we do. It's kind of everything we go away and do afterwards.
I mean, I think there are long debates within anthropology about teaching ethnography, and at least when I grew up and got my degree in anthropology, there was a kind of principled position that you should not teach ethnography because it wasn't a method in that sense. It had to be enacted. You could be apprenticed. You could be guided, but there wasn't a method. Now, I have very conflicted feelings about that. In some ways I feel it's a mystification. In other ways I feel exactly right. And if I think about writing in the case of academia, I think doing a PhD it's about developing a writing practice. And if I do any teaching about writing, I do it in my relationships with my PhD students, and every one of them is different. I mean, we can exchange tips, we can exchange, and PhD students do this all the time. They find each other and they go, how are you doing it? And here's what I found that helps. But basically, it is, I think, a very quite a wonderful. I mean, one thing that makes it so interesting to actually work with PhD students is that every one of them is different. And so I think, again, I think we should teach these things, but I'm not sure what it means to do that.
I just want to come back on the point you made about this. I think you said it's something to do with there's nothing intrinsic in the work of design in terms of changing.
Well,
Is that
in
wasn't
which
quite
direction you change?
Yeah, sure. But on the other hand, I mean, this is not a very interesting point, but I'll say it anyway. The emergence of design in the 19th century, through, and the sort of design theory, Henry Cole, Christopher Dresser, William Morris and Ruskin and so on, was very much a kind of reformist, reforming impulse about sort of tempering the world of objects, against the sort of onward march of industrialization. And that, for me, has been a very strong theme which has run through design theory, at least, and it gets reiterated in design colleges, as the design's inheritance of, that reform, and then through to the Bauhaus, and you say the Bauhaus, all great socialists and the rest of it. So for me, there's a kind of interesting historicity around a lot of design parlance, if you like, which is about sort of trying to anchor it in this kind of tempering impulse, whilst also, whilst, as you say, there's this kind of also this rhetoric of innovation and newness and so on. It's kind of, we sit uncomfortably.
But that occurs just within the academy.
Yeah.
There is a whole world outside of designers who are producing, when I'm talking to people who are making jet engines or watches, they aren't talking about that at all.
I think
they're talking about their audience and their world. And are we saying that because they don't fit this predilection, though they make objects, they're no longer designers? Becomes a problem. Because as far as the world, the populace, they are designers just as much as somebody with social motivations.
I think in the pub at the end of the day.
Well, overt social motivations, I should say. I think that there is a lot when these people are very happy producing objects which may be incredibly damaging to the environment and made of materials that may be questionable in a number of ways. But they are happy with that. They don't see that as questionable. They see that fits in with their personal politics. So why are these people going to be excluded as designers because they hold those views? Or is it just the fact that the academy has a particular point of view which it premises, and therefore other people get eluded from that position?
But I don't think it would be too categorical.
No, I'm not
get the designers in the pub at the end of the day avoid a forum like this, in front of an audience. And I think there's a different kind of language comes out there.
Well,
and there's a kind of interesting kind of,
It's how many of those people attend this sort of event. Are they a completely different world, and yet they have the same term that's used to describe them socially? And I think that's the difference between design theory and design as practice. There is an issue. Are you talking about it as are you closing off from the academy? The academy is closing off those parts that it doesn't find acceptable within the discourse of the discipline.
I didn't hear anybody saying those people weren't designers.
But if they are
closing anything.
Well, no. If they aren't, if you're talking about them being designers, you're talking about a large part of the design that's being presented, being created currently, is not necessarily critical in a political sense.
No, I mean,
it's hard. These people we love that we've all been taught to hate. There's an awful lot of them out there still doing it.
Well, I'm also reflecting on, I don't know, I'm a little uncomfortable because it's not just that there's a tendency to set up sort of a unitary category of designers versus sociologists, but now we're doing a kind of a few categories of designers and and I think it's just infinitely more complex than that. And then one of the things I was just sort of thinking about is that, characterizing sociologists as being within the academy and designers as being within commercial worlds is demonstrably false. I mean, there's a lot of sociologists who work, as Lucy once did, in commercial settings, and I suspect that there are any number of them who would be trained in sociology and use sociological techniques to do things that are entirely within the system, and in a way non-reflective. Just as there's lots of designers do, and there's some who don't. I don't know. Thanks.
So maybe I should, I'm coming back at this. I think there's something to be said for crude generalizations. What you said is not true. That is, it's a very sad thing that sociologists have no role in the world other than to teach in the academy. And Lucy is enormously an exception. There are very few sociologists not in the academy. I mean, I know this because I'm in the business of placing PhD students. I mean, undergraduates are in everything. I mean, they go. We agree on them.
Okay. I can only speak about the things that I see. But certainly within the world of technology, which is the one I work in, there's actually quite a few. I don't know.
No, but really, I would grant you the data. I mean, I pay attention in the, you know, we have like statistics. I wanted to use the word statistics. It just,
Well, I think part of this is about the relations among the professions, and I mean, we live in political economies where being able to make stuff is very commercially viable, and where theorizing the human condition, you know, I mean, you need to have a few people doing that, but you know, but not that many, and so I think that's why, you know, the disciplines are not evenly distributed across the economy. I mean, I don't think that's surprising, and I don't actually think that it's a sign of failure on the part of sociology. I mean, this is not. I think that sociology, people with degrees in sociology and engaging with sociology could have much more activist relations to the social world. But I don't think it's a problem that they aren't, you know, massively employable. I mean, I think that, you know, sometimes that may say good things about you if you're not massively employable.
Got that.
Pardon?
Sorry, not if you've got a student loan.
No, I don't mean it makes your life easy.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think it means that you are doing the wrong thing.
But increasingly also social scientists are being rendered into employable entities because of, you know, postgraduate training, for example, is about producing non-crunches which will go to go. So they are a whole sort of constituency of social scientists out there working for the government.
I'm from the German-speaking world. In the German-speaking world, I can give you the numbers. Most of the social scientists who end up doing a PhD don't end up in the academy for the simple fact that for, say, 100 PhDs, there's only one professorship, and if you don't become a professor, there's no way of being in the academy for a long term in the German-speaking world. But what is interesting about this is that all these people who have PhDs or MS or whatever, and who are sociologists, who end up having whatever kinds of jobs, aren't recognized as sociologists when they do these jobs, because the notion of being a professional sociologist, I mean, not in university, but doing whatever you do, just doesn't exist. And I think it's quite interesting as an analysis of sociology to look at that and to think about what it means that sociology itself doesn't recognize these people as sociologists, but as journalists, consultants, designers, whatever they end up being. And even if you would ask them, they wouldn't even say, I'm a sociologist. They would say, well, you know, I did a PhD in sociology, and then I ended up being blah, blah, blah. And I think it's quite interesting to think about what that means for sociology as a discipline, to sort of lose all these people.
Oh, do they use a term like social scientist? Do they use a term like social scientist? As
No. I think none of my friends who is a sociologist and who works whatever would even.
There was a similar study in the UK, a benchmark for what anthropologists do when they leave after their PhD. So they call themselves a specialist in an area or a specialist in a theme. In the UK as well.
Okay, two more questions. Lucy and then Michelle. Lucy, Michelle.
I guess I was going to make the same point that the last few folks made, because I think there's a lot of a place, not just like, you know, what Lucy was saying about the conditions of your work matter, and one of them is there's really regional differences. So, you know, in Canada, sociology I think looks quite different than it looks like here in the UK, and also different from America in that it's tethered so strongly to the state. It serves the state. It's like part of the governmentality of you know, audit culture on the one hand, but then there's all these kinds of sociologists who do critical work, but they're not in sociology departments. They're in all these other places. And one of the places in Canada where they exist are in schools of education, where they kind of make lives. And so I think it's interesting that you know, here there's this kind of, you know, traffic between design and sociology that's maybe particular to here and some other places, some other sites in Europe, maybe a couple of sites in North America, but they're particular traffics. And so it's the kind of disciplinary kind of generalizations maybe need to be kind of a kind of cartography of like where certain things are possible, and that there's a particular kind of group of people brought together here that's, you know, an interesting map to begin, you know, thinking about where things are possible. And then I guess I wanted to just say, to pick up on what Lucy was saying about writing, and connect it to what Harvey was saying about tacit knowledge, where I think writing is the great kind of place of the tacit in lots of social science and humanities research, and this question of, you know, elevating the way we apprentice, that this is a form of handmade craft that in our moment is becoming threatened, and you know, that we should be wary of the ways we're kind of maybe valuing visual analyses. Not that visual analysis isn't really powerful, but to be aware that right now it's often coming with like the loss of things like reading and writing as kinds of craft forms, and so that, you know, we can kind of materialize the reading and writing too, just like Lucy was saying.
Other question? Yeah? Someone? No? Okay. Lucy, no.
Yeah, when Nina told me the title of this workshop, Making an Opening, I really didn't understand it at all. I couldn't get it. Now I feel that I do, so I'm grateful for that. But I also really enjoyed today the thing that I think social sciences, and particularly STS, do bring, and I think this is of particular value to design at the moment, is holding, and I heard today, is holding in tension dualisms, not reducing things to design is this or this, social science is not this or this, and these various pairings, and not reducing things to simplicities. I still hear that a lot in the design worlds I move in, a desire to reduce design to this, that, or the other, a search for some ultimate definition, and hearing this group of people drawing on different traditions be okay with irreducible complexities, and be agonistic, I think is really important, and I've really enjoyed that, so thank you to all the organisers.
Well, fabulous note. So, a round of applause for everyone who's spoken today.